My name is Diane Bada. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in New York City. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what sex and porn addiction really is and how to recognize it. This can be a very controversial topic, but unfortunately, it's one that really needs to be talked about because porn addiction is becoming very, very common. That being said, not everything will fit the criteria for an addiction. So I wanted to make this video to kind of go through some of the nuances and also provide some strategies for seeking support if this is a concern that somebody has. In an age where explicit content is available within seconds, sexual stimulation is basically constantly marketed online. Conversations about sex and porn addiction, understandably, have become more common, but there's also some controversy in this. Why? Well, some people dismiss the idea entirely, while others might be struggling with behaviors that they feel that they can't control. The truth is a bit nuanced. Sex and porn addiction are not just about having a sex drive or watching adult content occasionally. What is key is that it is a compulsive pattern of behavior that continues despite negative consequences. That is pretty much how you can define what is an addiction in general. For many people, this behavior can damage relationships, break up marriages, lead to poor mental health, poor work performance, low self-esteem, and a reduced quality of life. So understanding the difference between healthy sexuality and maybe a high sex drive and compulsive behavior is pretty essential, especially because there's usually a lot of shame and misunderstanding wrapped up when we talk about issues of sexuality or sexual behavior. I'm going to go through, again, what sex and porn addiction are, how they develop, common warning signs, and what recovery can look like. So let us get started. What essentially is sex addiction? So sex addiction, which can also sometimes be called compulsive sexual behavior, is basically an ongoing pattern of sexual thoughts and actions that feel difficult or impossible to control. A person who is struggling with sex addiction might spend a lot of time pursuing sexual experiences, fantasizing, watching pornography, looking for hookups, engaging in risky behavior, so unprotected sex in environments where they might get arrested, or using sexual activity as a coping mechanism for certain emotions, maybe anxiety, loneliness, emotional pain, stress, etc. And that's important because the key issue is not the sexual behavior, it is the context for it. So is this behavior rooted in trying to get away from a particular emotion? Is this behavior resulting in the feeling of a loss of control? Those are the things to really look for. Sexuality is normal and it is a healthy part of life. So we should not be shaming sexuality in general, right? The problem begins when sexual behavior becomes compulsive, destructive, and emotionally consuming. What might be some signs that somebody is experiencing sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior? Well, you might notice that they are continuing with the behavior, whatever it is, despite running into relationship problems. They are neglecting their responsibilities. They feel that they are unable to stop. That's a big one. They experience intense guilt or shame afterwards. The behavior escalates over time. That's also another key sign. And in general, they're using sex or sexual behavior or pornography viewing, etc., to escape emotional discomfort. The cycle that you see typically resembles patterns that are seen in other addictions. So craving, temporary relief, feeling of a loss of control, and then emotional consequences afterwards, maybe feeling shame, guilt, poorly about oneself, etc. Okay, related but a little bit different. What is pornography addiction? Porn addiction or pornography addiction, if you want to use the full word, is generally considered a subtype of sex addiction, focused specifically on use of porn. So not everyone who is watching porn is addicted to it. That's important to underscore, but porn can become problematic when it starts to interfere with a person's everyday life. What would this look like? So this could look like spending hours a day watching porn, hiding usage from a partner or family members, feeling unable to stop despite repeated attempts, losing interest in real life intimacy or in having sex with one's partner, spouse, etc. Needing more extreme content or new content over time. This is a big one and an important one. Using porn to numb emotions or to avoid stress. Another key one, so experiencing intense anxiety, irritability, or restlessness when trying to quit. It's almost like a withdrawal syndrome, right? One thing that is important to understand about porn addiction is that it's typically less about sexual desire and more about emotional regulation. So if a person is using porn when they feel bored, sad, lonely, rejected, stressed out, over time the brain can start to associate emotional relief or feeling better from the viewing of porn. And that it can really set the stage for addiction. So that's pretty key when it comes to this. Okay, why is it controversial to even talk about this? It's controversial because unlike an addiction that it involves a substance like drugs or alcohol, a sex and porn addiction is basically considered a behavioral addiction because there's no external substance, right? So this can be more compared basically to something like a gambling addiction or other behavioral addictions. Some people might argue that you can't be addicted to porn or sex, but if you're looking at the criteria of a person feeling unable to stop, feeling like they are experiencing major negative consequences when it comes to relationships or work, utilizing sex or porn to meet an emotional need, it seems pretty obvious that it does meet the criteria for an addiction in certain cases. Okay, part of the discussion about addiction relates to the impact on the brain. So this is important to dig into a little bit. Sexual stimulation activates the brain's reward system, so particularly dopamine pathways, which are associated with pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement. Pornography, particularly internet pornography, creates a very powerful environment for stimulation because it offers endless novelty, immediate access, constant variety, and a very high-speed reward cycle. So basically that instant gratification, right? The brain is naturally wired to respond strongly to novelty and to anything that signals sex or sexuality, right? So repeated overstimulation might reinforce kind of a compulsive habit in vulnerable people just because the brain does respond so strongly to that. Over time, what this can look like is an increase in cravings, reduced satisfaction, escalation, feeling that you need to seek out more and more extreme content, difficulty focusing, feeling emotionally numb, and less of an interest in real offline relationships. This doesn't happen to everybody, but it can happen in certain cases, especially if a person is already isolated and is using porn as their primary coping mechanism for certain feelings or emotional states. Okay, what are some signs that an individual might be dealing with sex or porn addiction? And again, a lot of people wonder where the line exists between maybe more normal use and addiction. That probably depends on who you're talking to. Frequency is not maybe a good measure, but the more important thing to ask is this behavior causing a person harm or feelings of a loss of control? Are they experiencing detrimental consequences in their life? Some common signs of any addiction really that would apply here are repeated failed attempts to stop. So if a person has tried to cut back or quit many times without success, and they might say things like, oh, this is the last time, I'll only do it on weekends, I'll stop after today, yet this cycle keeps continuing, that is basically a hallmark of behavioral addiction or addictive behavior. Another major one is that the person is using hookups or porn to escape certain emotions. In behavioral addictions, this is extremely common. You see that the behavior is basically functioning as a tool for emotional coping. If a person is turning to porn or hookups when they are feeling lonely, anxious, depressed, angry, bored, stressed, or rejected, the brain can start to associate that behavior with relief, which then reinforces the cycle. Another thing to look for is that the behavior escalates over time. A person may feel that they need more and more to get the same effect. So just as an addict addicted to drugs will need a higher and higher dose, greater and greater quantity over time, you would see the same thing here when talking about sex or porn addiction. So they might find that they need to view content for a longer period of time, that they're viewing it more frequently, that they want to view things that are more extreme or feel that they need to engage in behaviors that are riskier and riskier. Another major one that comes up a lot is secrecy or leading a double life. This is very, very common. So probably not surprisingly, compulsive sexual behavior, sex addiction often involves an element of secrecy. People might be deleting their browsing history. They might have a second phone. They might use accounts late at night, meet up with escorts or random people online, and avoid talking about it. Keep it separate from any and everything else in their life related to that. You can often find that relationship problems can result from porn and sex addiction because intimacy ends up being distorted. Partners might experience, emotional distance, reduced intimacy, feeling betrayed, feeling that trust has been broken, a breakdown in communication. It's not possible to keep up a regular relationship that feels emotionally honest when this is the case. Sometimes compulsive porn use can also make real life connection feel boring in comparison. And that can be a real risk and a real danger. Person, maybe not surprisingly, might neglect responsibilities as their usage escalates. They might withdraw socially, they might miss work, they might lose sleep, miss certain deadlines, etc. Start to neglect other things in their life. And then a big one, a feeling of shame after the behavior has been engaged in. This is very common and a big feature of any addiction. A common cycle might look like feeling discomfort emotionally, feeling a craving or an urge to hook up or use porn, engaging in a hookup or porn use, feeling some temporary relief, experiencing guilt, shame, or regret afterwards, then feeling worse emotionally, and then repeating this. So this cycle can become very exhausting, and it can also lead a person to feel deeply isolated and ashamed. Okay, is there a profile for the type of person who is most vulnerable to this? Not really, especially with the proliferation of content and the fact that we're all walking around with computers in our pockets, basically. There are certain factors that might increase a person's vulnerability, however, which can include a trauma history, childhood neglect, anxiety or depression, loneliness, poor emotional regulation, early exposure to pornography, social isolation, chronic stress, or low self-esteem. All of these things can lead a person to seek something that will make them feel better emotionally, and seeking that online becomes something that is more accessible and quicker and easier than many other things. You might find that some individuals who end up diagnosed with this might have other underlying conditions like obsessive compulsive tendencies, mood disorders like depression or ADHD. These behaviors, these disorders are not about weakness or a lack of morality, and many times it does become a moral issue. In many cases, it reflects a deeper emotional struggle. Okay, what is the difference between behavior that meets criteria for addiction and somebody with a high libido? This is important. If somebody who has a strong sex drive is not necessarily sexually addicted. The key feature that we're looking for is a feeling of a loss of control over their behavior. So addiction will involve a sense of compulsion, a loss of control, major negative consequences, an emotional dependency, and an ability to stop. So if a person is engaging in sex in a healthy way, but it's not something that is leading to distress or disrupting their life, it would be argued that their behavior is healthy. What is the impact on mental health of a porn addiction or a sex addiction? It can be very significant. So you can see co-occurring anxiety, depression, shame, low self-esteem, isolation. People can often start using porn or wanting to hook up as a way to escape emotional pain. And ironically, it can make this worse because it is something that really thrives in isolation and secrecy. People can also find that they feel reduced motivation to do certain things. They find it hard to concentrate, and that it's hard for them to find meaningful relationships with others. Can people recover? Yes, they can, generally through therapy, finding a different support system, etc. The main thing is that a person really needs to rebuild a sense of healthy control, a sense of emotional awareness, and kind of relearn how to establish good relationships with others. There can be support groups that might be helpful from time to time. As part of something that comes up in a support group or in therapy, people will often be taught how to recognize certain emotional triggers. These could be things like stress, loneliness, relationship conflict, anxiety, or social rejection, a person might find that their behavior is triggered by these things, so they can learn to seek out healthier ways of coping. Often these are things like exercise, hanging out with friends, doing something creative, finding hobbies essentially that could provide a different way to feel better and that don't really depend on a compulsive escape. Sex and porn addiction are pretty complex, and it's about much more than sexuality. So the sexual behavior is the symptom and the thing that you see, but what they are really about goes much deeper than that. Generally relates to emotional struggles, patterns of avoidance that were learned a long time ago. If somebody feels trapped in sex addiction, they should realize that it's actually a very common thing and that change is very much possible. I would recommend that the person who is struggling with this seek out somebody who is a certified sex addiction therapist. So the acronym for that is a CSAT, C-S-A-T, and they have done specialized training related to this and would be most equipped to help out somebody really looking to stop this. I hope that this was helpful. This topic is a bit controversial, but it's very important, and I wanted to create this video because there is a lot of misinformation and oftentimes a lot of thinking that people can just sort of power through this, which is generally not the case. If you like this, you can share, you can subscribe, you can comment. Stay tuned for more videos. I'm trying to do them more frequently. It's been a little bit of a battle with that, but thanks for watching.